Bonfire Peaks is a Sokoban puzzle game designed by Corey Martin and published by Draknek. And that second bit, published by Draknek, is usually a decent indication that the game will be quite good, and over the years this is a company that's built up a small but solid catalogue of strong titles in this niche. Bonfire Peaks is a game that feels like it takes inspiration from Steven's Sausage Roll, and there are a lot of similarities in how the two games play. Now, I like comparing games to Steven's Sausage Roll whenever I get the opportunity because A, somebody might hear of it for the first time and then look it up on their own, and B, because it's quite a funny name to say, but in the case of Bonfire Peaks, the comparison is very accurate. A lot of the challenge in Bonfire Peaks is moving with almost tank-like controls, managing awkward turning circles, rotating 2x1 shapes through tight spaces, and using objects to push other objects around. The main difference is that unlike Steven's Sausage Roll, where the challenge is to avoid burning your sausages, the goal of Bonfire Peaks is to burn everything you own. Bonfire Peaks has a hub world filled with little bonfires, and each one of these is a puzzle for you to sit down and solve. The aim of every puzzle is to pick up the crate of your belongings and drop it into the giant 3x3 bonfire located somewhere in every level. These bonfires are always slightly too high or too far away, and the puzzle of a level will usually be trying to build a makeshift bridge or staircase out of the other crates you've been given. Solving a puzzle rewards you with a crate to use in the overworld, and by solving enough puzzles you can build structures to get you to the next area of the game. When you pick up a crate, or multiple if you stack them on top of one another, your movement gets a little more difficult. In Bonfire Peaks you can only walk forwards and backwards, so to go left or right you've first got to turn and point in that direction. But when you've got a crate sticking out in front of you, that's not always easy to do. It's a design that introduces little quirks into how you can navigate the levels and how you can move the blocks around. And it's the little quirks that form the basis of the puzzles. You can climb up one block, but not two. You can't walk forward up a staircase holding a crate because it will hit the step in front of you. You can easily stack two crates on top of one another, but when you press space, you pick up everything in front of you. So taking one crate off of another actually requires a third block for elevation. And so as you play, you develop little tricks to get around these things, like learning how to build a staircase without enough blocks by sort of building it as you climb. It's something that's a puzzle all of its own to begin with, and then just becomes another tool on your belt for the rest of the game. And as you progress, you'll develop a variety of tools to help you figure out tougher puzzles, and this is all before talking about the additional mechanics that Bonfire Peaks adds in later levels, but we'll get to them in a moment. I'm a big fan of Bonfire Peaks' visuals and sound design. The soundtrack brings a great ambience, with every track sounding like a call to nature, with a level of peace and serenity that I can guarantee you will not always have while solving the puzzles. The visual design is this dark voxel art with a lot of interesting backgrounds and neat visual effects. Although, because it is quite dark, sometimes the readability of a puzzle won't be the best, and you might end up initially missing something like a hole in the floor that actually completely changes what the puzzle is. You can zoom in and out and pan the camera to clarify anything if you need to, although because the directional movement is bound to the level and not the camera, I did often find myself pressing the wrong directional arrows when the camera wasn't in the middle. But this isn't an issue for the majority of the puzzles, and anyway there's a lenient undo feature to prevent anything like this from ever being too frustrating. Once you are clear on what a level actually looks like, the puzzles of Bonfire Peaks can be exceptionally clever. The first 15 or so levels of the 200 or so in the game are mostly just there to teach you the basic ideas, tricks and mechanics of Bonfire Peaks. But even that doesn't mean that these levels are simple. While going back and recording them for footage, I could blitz through these with ease, having solved so many puzzles after them, but on a first playthrough and when I first played the demo for this game, even some of these stages were a bit of a challenge as you grapple with your character's unorthodox movement. The variety of puzzles in Bonfire Peaks is fantastic. Some levels are about moving blocks around or building bridges, stairs and platforms, but some are more like building tools or machinery, using a block to extend your reach or setting crates up carefully so that you can use one to push another into another. As you play further, the game even adds in more mechanics for you to work with. Rivers that carry boxes along like a conveyor belt, crumbled rocks that you can only stand on once before they break, And then it even gets a bit Indiana Jones with some puzzles related to spike and arrow traps. And with every mechanic that gets introduced, there is this build-up of complexity, introducing even more ways for that mechanic to be used. The first arrow trap is just about not getting hit by an arrow, and then you might have to use a crate to block an arrow. But then just a few puzzles later, you'll find yourself deliberately trying to shoot arrows into particular crates so that you can push another block onto the other end of the arrow and sort of dowel multiple crates together into some sort of makeshift tool. And so suddenly, from a mechanic that was introduced in quite a simple and intuitive way, you've now got this very deep and engaging puzzle that can be created from. Bonfire Peaks thinks about how to create a puzzle from its mechanics in more than just a surface level way. And every mechanic, even just the regular crate movements, has this build-up of ideas and complexity and puzzles of varying scales that combine your prior knowledge with something new to work towards and figure out. And it's always incredible in some of the more difficult puzzles just how many ways there are to approach the level that you might not have thought of. But along with that has to come a warning. Bonfire Peaks is pretty difficult, and I say that as someone who plays a lot of these games. It's certainly more beginner friendly than Steven's Sausage Roll, which has no tutorial puzzles whatsoever, but yeah, that's not really saying much. Difficulty itself isn't a complaint, because a lot of the difficulty comes from the depth and complexity of the mechanics and puzzles, and those are the same things that make Bonfire Peaks rewarding to play. My complaints regarding the difficulty would be that A, it does seem to jump around quite a bit, but more importantly B, there were a handful of puzzles where I didn't feel equipped with the tools to solve them. So I said earlier in the video that learning how to build a staircase as you climb is a tool that you develop in some of the earlier puzzles and then you start to use that later. But there was one mechanic where it felt like that never really happened. If you hold a crate over a fire, it burns, but it isn't destroyed. When you remove this crate from the fire, it now acts like a destructible block that you'll have seen in other puzzles. I do not remember being taught this mechanic, and even when I replayed a lot of the earlier levels for footage, I still didn't find a puzzle that would have taught it. And it's something that never really fully ended up on my tool belt. I knew it existed, but when you're thinking multiple steps ahead about what to do in a level, sometimes it just wouldn't be there. It's like if you gave a novice chess player a puzzle to solve, and it required them to take en passant 6 moves down the line. There's a good chance that once they got there in their head, they just wouldn't have remembered that it's a thing that they can do. And so a lot of the puzzles that took me a significant amount of time to solve, or the handful that I just gave up and googled, this mechanic was present in all but one of them, and I just never felt like I was ever going to think of it. And there were a few other puzzles that ended up involving what I thought was a slightly weird interaction that could be a bit annoying, but these are very much the exceptions, and luckily, Bonfire Peaks is not a linear game. You can choose any puzzle you have access to in the overworld, and you don't have to solve every puzzle. If you are finding a puzzle slightly frustrating, you can just wander to a different campfire and start a new one. It's a similar idea to in a monster's expedition, and being able to give up, move on, and come back later definitely improves the flow of both of these games, because there's no point being stuck on one puzzle for longer than you're enjoying it. Overall, I think Bonfire Peaks is a fantastic game and a fine addition to the collection of any puzzlehead, with easily 10-20 plus hours of gameplay if you want it. The visuals and soundscape are excellent, the puzzles are incredibly clever, and if you want to give Bonfire Peaks a try before you buy, it even has a demo on Steam. If you consider yourself to be pretty good at puzzle games, then this is one that I highly recommend checking out. But if you'd like to hear about another quality and slightly easier Draknek published puzzler, then my video for A Monster's Expedition should be on the screen right now, and that is another wonderful game that I highly recommend. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.